Hello, fellow Java developers. Welcome back to our starter course on Apache Camel. In this video, we'll take a look at working with beans in Apache Camel. In particular, we'll learn different ways we can use beans and call their methods, and we'll see what a bean method binding is in Camel. Let's begin. For this video, I've already created a new Camel project. You should be familiar with it already. It has just Camel core and login dependency. It has a main class that creates and runs Camel context, and it has two routes, each of them calling a bean method. And with the help of these routes, we'll take a look at how we can use beans. So, the first, most simple method might be already familiar for you because we've done it in our previous videos. We can just specify bean DSL element, provide the name of a bean required, and if this bean is added to our Camel context registry and the bean itself has only one method that accepts exchange, we can just specify this bean name in our route, and this method will be called and our exchange will be processed. But this is not the only way to call our bean method. In fact, there are three main ways to call bean methods in Camel. First is this bean DSL element, and we can also specify method name here. Then the other way to do the same thing is to use to DSL element and specify bean, then bean name, and in this case, to specify method, we will need to use an endpoint URI parameter. And the last way of calling bean method is doing it in choice or filter DSL elements. For example, when we want to check some condition in our when statement, we can call our bean here and specify method name in the second argument, like that. Of course, for this to work, this doSomething method should return boolean value. And same with filter DSL element. We can filter our exchanges based on evaluating this method that should return boolean. So these are three main ways in which we can call bean methods in Camel route. Now onto the return value of bean methods. For now, we've only used void bean methods, and in this case, we already know how this works. All exchange processing is happening in the method itself. But what we're doing here, we're setting message body to the same message body, but in uppercase. This can be simplified with bean method return value. You see, if a bean method has return value, then the return value will be written to message body automatically. And we don't have to call exchange, get message, set body to change our message body. So this code is exactly the same as we've had before with void return type. You see here we're doing set body, but we can get rid of it and just return string that will be set as message body automatically. Now onto the main part, method binding. As you can see, we don't have to specify method name when our bean has only one method. But what if we have several? Then we will need to somehow specify which method to call. And the most obvious way of doing it is in this bean DSL element, just pass method name as a second argument. And if we have two DSL element, we will just specify the same as a method URI parameter. So these two DSL elements are doing exactly the same thing. Another way of specifying method to call is annotating our method with handler annotation. It doesn't matter how many methods we have in our bean, If we have only one annotated with handler, it will be called even if we don't specify its name in our DSL. But it is usually better to specify method name explicitly, not only because it will be clear which method is called from the DSL itself, but also because we can pass parameters here. As you can see from this example bin, Camel automatically passes exchange to our method. But what if we need to pass, for example, body of our message or some header or some other arguments? For this, we can use simple language and specify our method call like that. We have our method name and in braces we have our parameters. If we need to pass some other argument, we can just type it here. For example, if we need to pass a boolean, we can just write true or false. Same with any string. For that we can use single quotes, so that's how we can pass a string. And we can also use simple expressions. As you can see here, this simple expression extracts a message body and passes it as a string to the specified method. Of course, message body type should be compatible with what you have in your method, otherwise you will get an exception. Next, onto the parameters binding. Of course, you can specify parameters as you can see here in route DSL, but you can also do it in a method itself with the help of parameter binding annotation. For example, to bind body to the string, we can just specify body annotation here in our parameter, and then we can get rid of passing this parameter in our DSL. You can look up a full list of these parameter binding annotations here in this documentation page. Link will be down below. Basically, you can bind any part of your exchange: body, headers, variables, properties, and exception. So, if you don't want to specify method calls here, you can use an annotation and bind method parameter in the method itself. If you have many routes with similar bin method calls, then it is probably better to use annotation-based binding. But if you want to be more flexible, you can always use DSL binding and specify a method call in the DSL element itself using the simple language. Camel also has an automatic method binding, as you saw here with the exchange. It is the same with message, camel context, and some other camel object, but the best approach is to set our bindings explicitly with annotations or DSL specifications and not rely too much on automatic parameter binding. So, to sum things up, we can call bins with bin DSL element to DSL element by specifying bin component and method name as an endpoint URI parameter. Our bins are looked up in Camel registry, to which we can bind bin object ourselves, or in the case of using Apache Camel with Spring or Quarkus, we can reference bins of corresponding frameworks. Then, to bind method of our bin, we're using this method parameter or method endpoint URI parameter in case we're using two. And to bind method parameters, we're using these DSL specifications that support simple language. Or we can use handler annotation to specify which method should be called when calling this bin, and use parameters binding annotation to specify which camel exchange parts should be used as our method parameters. So basically, for bin method and parameters binding, we can either use these annotations, or we can specify method name and its parameters in the DSL itself, or we can use a mix of both, for example, specify method name in the DSL and bind parameters with annotation, or vice versa. And with that, here is the end of our video on working with beans in Apache Camel. Thanks for joining. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. And if you have any comments or questions, leave them down below. I will answer to all of those. See you in the next video. Until then, happy coding!